Good afternoon. Welcome to the Wisconsin edition of our state webinar series exploring the findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat, the State of the States report. Before we get started, let me run through some logistics to help make this a good experience. Everyone has been muted, so no need to do that yourself. If you would like to ask a question or to make a comment, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of that panel allows the panel to shrink and reopen. You'll see a question section of the control panel. You can pop that section out by clicking on the little square on the right-hand side. That decouples it from the control panel, which allows you to type in a question or a comment. We will allow plenty of time for those questions during the presentation. We are recording the webinar and will send the link to everyone who is registered. Please feel free to share this recording with others. So let me now introduce myself. I am Chris Coffin, American Farmland Trust's Senior Policy Advisor. I also direct our newly launched National Agricultural Land Network, which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. Co-hosting with me is Allison Volk. Allison is AFT's Easement Project Manager and is based here in Wisconsin. Allison works on land protection projects across the U.S. and especially here in the Midwest. She is also involved in our Wisconsin state policy work. Joining us as well for the questions is Brian Bordage, our Michigan-based Land Protection and National Agricultural Land Network Midwest consultant. For those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me do a very quick introduction. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We work to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We work from kitchen tables to the halls of Congress, from direct farmland protection projects to soil health initiatives, to training service providers on land access and tenure strategies, to state and federal policy development and advocacy. We have 6 regional offices and a national office located in Washington, D.C. So let me now turn it over to my co-host, Allison.
Thank you, Chris. We're delighted to be joined here today by a number of valued partners, including the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, the Department of Natural Resources, the United Nations, and the Wisconsin Tribal Conservation Advisory Council, the University of Wisconsin, Wisconsin Farmers Union, several county land conservation and planning departments, and many land conservation organizations and land trusts from across the state. Thank you all for joining us. We would also like to recognize our USDA partners, Farm Service Agency and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We'd like to thank NRCS especially for their collaboration and support of this project. They've been an integral partner, as has our research partner in this project, Conservation Science Partners. And now I would like to welcome our very special guest, Secretary of DACAP, Randy Romanski. Secretary Romanski has a long history of leadership within the department, serving under both Governor Evers and Governor Doyle, and he played an important role in the Working Lands Initiative. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Allison. It's really a pleasure to be joining you today, and welcome to all who are joining us via webinar. As Allison said, I'm Randy Romanski. I'm the Secretary Designee of the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection, and I am really honored to be leading an agency that is engaged with our $104.8 billion agriculture industry in the state of Wisconsin. Agriculture is part of our past, it's part of the present, and it's part of the future. A key to that is our farmers, rural economies who feed their neighbors, they feed our state, they feed the nation, and they feed the world. In order for them to do that, they need to be stewards of their land, which they are. Agriculture and farmers are the original conservationists. They care about the land. The land supports them, as well as this large network of others that are fed by Wisconsin farmers. So it's really important that, obviously for them, that they care about protecting their farmland, but we all should share that with them. And I think here in Wisconsin we do value that. Agriculture contributes 1 in 9 jobs in the state of Wisconsin, so it's an economic engine for the state. Agriculture and agriculture processing happens across the state of Wisconsin, from our most rural areas to processing that happens in our urban centers. It's dependent upon farmers and it's dependent upon farmland. And that's one of the things that's contributed to the strength of Wisconsin over time, and the understanding that there is a need to conserve and preserve farmland for the benefit of our state's economy. But there's also a heritage component of it. As I said, agriculture is part of our state's roots. And even with the challenges that farmers were facing, even in advance of COVID-19, bad weather patterns, trade imbalances, historically low prices, that gets exacerbated by COVID-19. But there's still a need to make sure that we're investing in a diverse, widespread agriculture portfolio in our state, because it's part of our economy, it's part of our heritage, it's part of who we are. Preserving that farmland is extremely important to all of that.
It's great. Thank you, Secretary Romanski. When you're looking at the report, Wisconsin gets the top policy score among states in the Midwest in addressing farmland conversion. Do you have any thoughts about what you might attribute that success to?
Thanks, Allison. That's a great question. We're fortunate that there's been some shared collaborative approaches over the course of time in Wisconsin to be in that spot. I'm going to give a substantial dose of the credit to that to former Secretary Rod Nilsestein, who was the secretary at the time of the Working Lands Initiative being put in place. Wisconsin has long had an attention to farmland preservation, but one of the valuable things that Secretary Nilsestein did, and I think the agency has continued on with this, is play that forward. So as we look at what Wisconsin had, which is a robust farmland preservation program, what happened with the Working Lands Initiative is it started to kind of build out around that. So the goal of the program is to help farmers and local governments preserve farmland, protect soil and water, minimize land use conflicts. And by engaging farmers, local governments, I would say state, federal, local partners, the participation in the program was set up for a variety of things. Counties could develop farmland preservation plans. Local governments develop farmland preservation zoning districts. So counties are engaged. Zoning is utilized as a tool. Engaging landowners and local governments together to set up agriculture enterprise areas. In other words, regional economic clusters, rural regional economic clusters, recognizing the important value of small communities throughout the state of Wisconsin, understanding that having a cluster of agriculture industry representatives, whether it's the farmer, the co-op, the equipment, the dealer, the mechanics, the veterinarian, it's important to preserve that core. And that's one of the reasons that agriculture enterprise areas have been successful and valuable. And then another important component of this, and why it's important, another reason why it's important for us to be protecting farmland, is that landowners meet soil and water conservation standards to make sure that they're eligible to claim any kind of income tax credit that happens as a result of being engaged in the farmland preservation program. So all those components work together, I think, to develop this recipe for or a template for success.
Those are great points. And I guess one follow-up question I have, we obviously wouldn't be here having this conversation if farmland loss wasn't still a challenge, despite all of those efforts that different groups have put forward. What do you think? How can stakeholders help to keep the issue front and center in their communities and with state policymakers?
That's a great question, Allison. So I guess what I would say is kind of go back to the roots or the foundation of it all. What can lead to success? And I think some of those things are what makes a lot of programs or policy development ideas successful. And this isn't a cliche, but it's think globally, act locally. And I think a lot of this starts right back at home. So making sure that people are talking to their local government, talking to their neighbors. In the cases of the ag enterprise areas, it's really important to have connection and collaboration between people within an area, because people should want to, and they do want to, maintain these contiguous properties that are dedicated to agriculture, because that helps stimulate that local economic engine that agriculture is throughout the state of Wisconsin. So as we look at the pressures that are exerted on farmland over time, I think, the things that people can do to keep the issue front and center is communicate with others, obviously, be out front, be willing to have the conversations, utilize those agencies or those organizations that are resources. So I talked about starting with local governments and neighbors. That's the acting local portion of it. But the thinking global aspect of it is engage county, states, federal partners as well. Some of the people that are on the phone here, because we are resources to the citizens of the state, and one of the responsibilities of the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, in our opinion, is to be that resource for the industry and the agencies, the farmers, the consumers that we serve. So we're available as a resource. Please feel free to make use of our team as well if people have questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Secretary Romanski. We understand that you need to jump off early, but we just want to thank you again for your leadership, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and the department on furthering farmland retention and protection in Wisconsin.
Thank you, Allison. We really appreciate the partnership, and I thank you for having me on today for a short period of time.
So thank you, Secretary Romanski. It is great to have your perspectives, and thank you, Allison. So now we're going to talk about the findings from the Farms Under Threat report. Today we're focusing on the State of the States, which is the second in this research series. State of the States paints a striking picture of the threats facing working farms and ranches in every state, and documents the steps every state has taken to protect their agricultural land base from development. We used a multi-pronged approach that included advanced spatial mapping to identify the threats to agricultural land and an in-depth analysis of state policy responses. We're using this report to raise public awareness, to inform state and federal policy, and to encourage more direct and permanent agricultural land protection. For those of you who did not join us for our launch events, let me touch very quickly on our national findings. From 2001 to 2016, a period of historically low housing starts, the U.S. nonetheless converted 11 million acres of agricultural land. That's equivalent to all the land planted in the U.S. to fruits, nuts, and vegetables in 2017. The majority of that conversion was to low-density residential land use. We've known this type of conversion was happening because all across the country, scattered large lot housing has been fragmenting and disrupting farming and ranching for years. But until this report, no one had ever been able to map it and measure it. And once we mapped it, we realized just how big a threat it is. Importantly, more than a third of the land converted, about 4.5 million acres, was what we have identified as nationally significant agricultural land That's land best suited for intensive food and crop production. And as you can see from this next map, agricultural land conversion is a growing problem across the US. It's no longer confined to large metropolitan areas, particularly on the east and west coasts. Small cities are sprawling, and the proliferation of farmettes and ranchettes on their outskirts has created hotspots of conversion in virtually every state. So now we're going to dive into the data available for Wisconsin, and we're going to go to the interactive website. We are going to be assisted in our cruise through the website today by our colleague and cruise director, Beth Frazier. So thank you, Beth. And we're going to start with this reports and tab section over here. This is where you'll find the fact sheets that describe the methodology. You'll also find the link to the full report and to a number of different resources. If you are interested in getting access to the geospatial data we used, you can go to this geospatial data layer where Beth is pointing. That takes you to a form, fill that out, and we will be back in touch with you to let you know what is available and when it will be available. So with that, let's go to the drop-down menu and choose Wisconsin. And here you will see that you can find both spatial data and the policy scorecard data. We're going to start with spatial, and we are first going to start with the highlight summary. So see this download Wisconsin conversion summary. When you click on that, you get a beautiful 2-page downloadable document. So for those who have very slow Wi-Fi like I do, this is very helpful. It gives you the most pertinent information, gives you key statistics. This is a great resource to give to reporters, to give to local planning boards, to give to state policymakers. It has great infographics. So please use this as a resource. There is also, we're not going to take the time to do it, but there is also a similar policy scorecard one as well that you can download and use. So let's go now to the 4 categories of the spatial data we've created. Starting with land cover and use. So State of the States uses multiple national data sets to develop the best available spatial inventory of agricultural land use in the US. You can zoom in on this data layer to identify every type of land use in the state, including land that we've identified as low density residential development. That is the sort of burnt orange that you see here. Our mapping shows, it also includes a first ever attempt to spatially identify woodland associated with a farm. Our mapping shows 15 million acres of agricultural land, including 9.76 million acres of cropland, 2.8 million of pasture land, and 2.4 million of acres of woodland associated with farms. So let's go to PVR values. For farms under threat, we wanted to analyze the quality of land that is being lost to development, not just the quantity. So we created, with the help of a national panel of experts, an index to quantify the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of every acre of land in the US. This map shows the range of these PVR values across the state. The darker the green, the higher the PVR value, and the higher the PVR value, the higher the suitability of that land for long-term intensive crop production, especially for food crops, such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, and staple grains. These PVR values we then use to identify nationally significant land. And so this next map shows the nationally significant land in Wisconsin. You'll see that 9.1 million acres of land falls into this category, or about 61% of the state's agricultural land base. About 7.8 million acres of this is cropland, with 864,000 in pasture and 460,000 acres of it in woodland. And we point this out because the loss of this highly productive land has both economic and environmental implications. When nationally significant land is impacted by development, that intensive food production is pushed to more marginal lands. The economic cost to farmers is that input costs typically then are higher and crop yields are typically lower. The environmental cost is that soils degrade typically more quickly. And then finally, let's go to conversion. We looked at a 15-year period from 2001 to 2016, again, a period of historically low housing starts with a deep recession in the middle. We mapped the conversion of agricultural land to two types of land use. The first is urban and highly developed land. This includes traditional culprits in farmland conversion, so expanding residential, commercial, and industrial areas typically found in cities and towns. This category also includes, though, rural, industrial, and energy production sites, including oil and well pads and solar panel installations. The second type is low-density residential development. This is the first effort of its kind to quantify the extent of large lot housing on the agricultural land base. LDR areas range from lower density subdivisions to rural areas where more and more individual houses are being built. You can see that the majority of conversion, 154,000 acres over this time frame, was to LDR. And just to point out, it doesn't mean that there's no active agriculture on LDR land. There is, and some of that production can be highly productive and profitable. We know that from small farm parcels. But we also know that LDR tends to be a transitional land use. Land in Wisconsin that was considered LDR in 2001 was 21 times more likely to be converted to urban and highly developed land by 2016 than other agricultural land. And we know that that continued conversion increases the management challenges for farmers who are having to deal with farming in and around non-farm neighbors. Total ag land converted over this 15-year period was just under 250,000 acres. And then looking at the PVR values of the land converted, about 58% of the conversion was to land considered nationally significant. And so with that, let me stop and turn it over to Allison for a few perspectives about what she's seeing with the spatial findings.
Thanks, Chris. You know, when we think about farmland in Wisconsin, we think that there's a limitless supply. But I think one of the notable things about this map is that the state's particularly productive land is really the land that's most under threat. And we're really seeing the most conversion in those areas. Beth, can you zoom in to the Lake Winnebago area on that map? As we get closer in, you can see how from Fond du Lac up through Green Bay, it's almost like it's turning into one city. There's really these pinch points on agriculture where agricultural land is being pressured from both sides, as Fond du Lac to Oshkosh, then to Appleton, and then to Green Bay exerts pressure on both sides. Now, can you go over to the western part of the state towards Eau Claire? And if you could also, I'll wait till you get there. If you could also change to the land use cover, because one of the things that, as Chris has mentioned, and I think is really showing up in Wisconsin, is this pressure from LDR, and you can see it, and this happens all over the state, and you can see it going from Eau Claire to the Twin Cities, where you have these pockets of LDR, and there's almost like a bridge that's going between Eau Claire and Menominee, and you know the LDR land is really exerting this pressure then on some of the most valuable ag land that the state has. And one more point, if we can go then down to the southeast by Milwaukee. I think it's probably not a surprise to a lot of people that are on this webinar that there's a lot of land use conversion pressure in the southeastern part of Wisconsin. But I think one thing that this map really highlights is how that hopscotch look of the LDR is really exerting so much added pressure on the ag land that already exists. And so it's not so much that Milwaukee is expanding incrementally, it's that you have these spots of LDR that's jumping over farmland, and then the farmland on either side going from southwest of Milwaukee to west towards Madison. You're really breaking up and fragmenting so much agricultural land. I'll turn it back to you, Chris.
Great, thank you, Allison. That was really helpful to see those. Before we turn to the policy scorecard, we want to stop and get some input from all of you on this webinar. We're interested in your perspectives on what will drive agricultural land conversion over the next 10 to 20 years in Wisconsin. And we ask this here because as we start thinking collectively about the policy response, understanding what folks think is going to be the drivers of conversion going forward will influence what we think about what is the type of policy changes that Wisconsin might need to make in order to keep the agricultural land base viable. So here you see these, some of these ones, these potential drivers. You can vote for more than one, and if you're having trouble voting, it may be because you're in full screen mode, so get out of that mode to vote, and then you can go back to full screen. Okay, so let's, this is great to know. We have done now 18 webinars around the country with these state findings. I would say that all of you are like folks in other states of saying that they still think that the two biggest drivers are more and poorly planned residential, commercial, industrial development, and this emerging and growing challenge of generational transfer of agricultural land. I think in a state like Wisconsin, where dairy is still the primary user of that agricultural land base, the weak agricultural viability is going to remain a huge challenge. AFT recognizes, one, that it's not farmland without farmers, and that profitable farming means that land is less likely to come out of agriculture. So we understand this concern and that challenge as well. So with that, let's turn to the policy scorecard. Our intention with the scorecard is to highlight effective elements of state policies that have addressed some of these drivers of conversion. This is the first effort that we have made at a policy scorecard, even though we have been working on state and federal policy on these issues since our founding. And we know that there are many ways that states support agriculture. This is true in Wisconsin as it is in other places. And what we want to stop and say is that we did not attempt to score all of the ways that Wisconsin is supporting its agricultural industry, because as the Secretary mentioned, that is through a number of different mechanisms, and we understand that. We focus on 6 policies and programs that tie directly to the land, and let's just walk through them very quickly. They are the purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs. Again, these can be known as purchase of development rights, or in Wisconsin, the Farmland Preservation Program. Again, voluntary programs that compensate landowners who choose to place an easement on their property. We looked at land use planning. We understand that planning is driven largely at the county and municipal level, and the suite of tools that are available at the county and local government level to support compact development and protect agricultural land must be robust. States, though, can play an important role in guiding and supporting these decisions in a way that supports the agricultural land base. So that's why we looked at this land use planning element. We looked at property tax relief for agricultural land, recognizing that these programs that recognize that working lands require far less in municipal services than does residential development is an important way of keeping farmers on the land. We looked at agricultural districts programs. So Wisconsin is one of the 14 states with the program, which in Wisconsin is the ag enterprise areas. Ag districts generally encourage landowners to form special areas to support agriculture. Protection incentives often differ by program. Some protect landowners with limits on annexation, limits on eminent domain, protection from the siting of public facilities and infrastructure. Some offer tax incentives, and some require district enrollment to participate in state PACE programs. These last two, Farm Link and state leasing ones, are ones that get to that generational transfer and access to land for next generation farmers. Farm Link programs connect farm seekers with farmers and landowners who want their land to stay in agriculture. They can be administered by public or private entities. We included only those state-supported programs here because we feel that having some state involvement helps to make them more robust on a statewide basis. They can offer a range of services and resources, from online real estate postings to technical assistance, training, and educational resources. And lastly, we looked at state leasing. So the ways that states make state-owned land available to farmers for agriculture. Sometimes that is their primary purpose, but more often agricultural use is secondary to generating income for a public purpose or for protecting wildlife habitat. So now we're going to look very quickly at how Wisconsin scored relative to other states. So a little under the median for PACE and property tax relief, above the median for planning and ag districts, and nothing for Farm Link, again, because there's no state-supported program, and a small score on state leasing. And let me stop here just to say that we recognize that Wisconsin is not likely to have the robust set of policy tools and the depth of experience that some other states have, especially those on the East and West Coast, which is where those top scores are, because those states have been grappling with farmland conversion for far longer than Wisconsin has. The point we want to make here is that as Wisconsin's farmland conversion intensifies, Wisconsin's policy response must do so as well. The website allows you to dive into the factors behind the scores. You can go to the select policy or program. We're just going to do a couple of these. Let's start with looking at PACE. Wisconsin gets good points for having good program infrastructure. What it lacks is funding and activity. Wisconsin's per capita spending over the life of its program has been 9 cents. When you look at the acres protected to the acres converted, which is there on the far right-hand side, and you see that 3, it suggests that Wisconsin's investment in its PACE program is simply not keeping pace with the need. I do want to mention the Federal Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which provides an important source of matching funds for farmland protection, as does USDA's Regional Conservation Partnership Program. We do hope that the changes made to both of these programs in the 2018 Farm Bill will continue to improve their utility for farmland protection in Wisconsin. We will be reaching out over the summer through the National Agricultural Land Network to solicit feedback on how these programs could be more fully utilized by partners. Let's look really quickly at land use planning. Again, this is looking at what state government is doing to guide or support those local planning and zoning decisions. So Wisconsin gets a good score for requiring county farmland protection plans, but not all counties have those plans. Wisconsin also gets good points for past support for developing comprehensive plans. We note that that support is not currently available. States that scored higher in this area have ongoing support to local governments in developing comprehensive plans. And they also have state goals around both compact development and retaining their agricultural land base, and then require some consistency between those local comprehensive plans and state goals. So lastly, I think that we will look at ag districts. So for Wisconsin, that's the state ag enterprise areas. Wisconsin gets high marks for those farmland preservation agreements within the ag enterprise areas. And as the secretary said, this program can be particularly helpful, and its connections to farmland protection and that local planning and zoning. The states that score high in the ag district category tend to provide additional protections within their districts, as well as additional incentives. And maybe because of this, other states have slightly higher enrollment in their ag districts. And so let me just, Beth, if you could go down to the bottom just to make sure that everybody knows how they can see how these scores came. How we scored it, you see all the components of the scoring down below. There is further description of this in the methodology section. So you see on state leasing, we're not going to go to it. There was a 0 on acres leased. Unclear to me whether the state doesn't track that information or whether we weren't able to get it. States that received high scores on state leasing have done a comprehensive inventory of state-owned land across the board of all agencies that could be made available for farming. And then they've promoted the use of that land through a transparent process. And we point this out just because we think it's an important mechanism for identifying new land access opportunities, especially smaller plot parcels in and near urban areas. So let me stop there. I hope it was a helpful cruise through the findings. If you have questions, please write them in. As we go out of the website, we're going to launch a poll which asks which policy or policies you think would be most valuable to focus on for Wisconsin. Again, you'll see, unfortunately, we didn't have room to put in state leasing and farm link. Feel free to write those in the question line if you feel that those are the highest priorities. And it's not to say that these are the only policies. We know that several states have and are contemplating beginning farmer tax credits. We know that that is a potentially valuable tool on, again, providing some of that generational transfer and land access opportunities for next generation farmers. And again, this obviously doesn't focus on some of the ag viability mechanisms as well, but amongst these, we're interested in your thoughts. And just while people are voting, I'm just going to keep going of saying that the network will be hosting a series of policy webinars beginning in the early fall, which we hope will be a way for those of you who want to learn more about specific policies. So let's, Beth, look quickly at what people said. Again, it's great to see there's interest across the board on land use planning and PACE programs and ag districts. Again, thinking about what more could those ag enterprise areas do, what more can be done on the land use planning. So I encourage folks to join our policy webinars this fall. Coming out now, we're going to talk just for a minute about the one thing that's missing from our spatial analysis, which is a comprehensive data layer focused on agricultural land protection. There is no such national database on agricultural protected ag land. We're building it. We do see fortunately, some green in Wisconsin. If you have not heard from us and you are in an entity or land trust that holds agricultural conservation easements, please write your name in on that in the question as a question or a comment, and we will be back in touch with you because we don't want to miss anybody who might be holding easements. So with that, let's stop and see, Brian, if there are any questions.
Thank you, Chris. We do have some great questions. One I wanted to share was from a specialty crop grower in the south central part of Wisconsin who's asking what policies exist in Wisconsin to support the successful access of farmland for beginning farmers and to aid in the successful succession of farmland. And I would extend that to say maybe what are some that are possible that maybe aren't being used.
Right, so I'll offer my quick perspectives, but Allison will have the on the ground Wisconsin perspective. So again, in terms of what are some of those existing tools, it's one of the reasons why we think that having a PACE program is valuable, because it's our experience that for a farmer who is looking to either transfer land to a child or to a sibling or to a non-farming relative, that transfer is going to be easier if that land has been protected, because the value, if you're in an area where there's any development pressure, the value of that agricultural land is going to be less. So it's going to make it more affordable. So number one, I would say the importance of the state PACE program and the ability of the state to be working at the county level and with land trusts on farmland protection is vitally important as a transfer tool. On the beginning farmers, I think, again, there are a number of things that can be done. It's why we talk about the sort of things that are part of farm linking. And obviously, and maybe Allison can talk to some efforts that are happening around Wisconsin around listing, linking, and matching, and whether it's land trusts who are trying to help provide some of those resources and find those or help those land seekers find potentially available farmland. It's something, it doesn't need to be the state. There are many players in this arena. And similarly on the farm transfer and succession, it's often a role that extension plays. My assumption is that Wisconsin Extension does some of this. I don't know how much, but those are sort of the tools that are out there right now. And so let me turn to Allison for any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's certainly a threat to farmland conversion. You know, I'm not aware of a statewide farm linking program. I do know that there has been some effort with grazing land, and you know, I think there's probably others on this call that actually have a lot of experience with that. And another, I would actually make a plug for DACAP's Farm Center, because I know that they do work with farmers one-on-one on planning for next steps. But, you know, I think as we'll talk about in a little bit, these are definitely issues statewide that are worth talking about more to try to address farmland loss around the state.
Thanks, Allison. Another question that was posed was if the conversion data that AFT utilized for this study includes the conversion of land involved in mining, and I would suspect probably that same person might be interested in the issues with oil and gas development as well.
Well, so as I said, what the conversion, so from the land cover data, we were able to look at some of that conversion to urban and highly developed land. That does, and I don't know what down to what resolution and scale, but if it was land that had not been mined before 2001, presumably if it was mined and not reclaimed, it would show up as having been converted in that time frame. And that also holds true. So as I was saying, on the renewable energy front, we did pick up particularly larger scale solar installations, not the backyard variety or the very small ones, but again, I couldn't tell you what the scale is of how big those installations have to be, but it does, that is stuff that you can see on the land cover and use when you go to the, that dark red is what we saw as urban and highly developed. You can make that transparent when you're in the website and look at the land cover underneath it, and that would give you an idea of the area that you're talking about in terms of mining.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I would just recommend that people do that and see the variety of kinds of conversions that are going on, because highly developed can mean any number of things, right? So thank you. Another question was in regards to, maybe a final question, in regards to policy recommendations, what kind of work has AFT done or seen where states have looked at property taxation issues and how they might be actually incentivizing development in suburban areas, for example?
Well, that is a really good question, and I would invite Brian, you or Allison to offer thoughts here. I think, it's part of, we sort of come to it from a lot of our cost, this is not directly answering it, but our cost of community services studies, consistently show that farmland and forest land requires few municipal services, and therefore the taxes on that should be lowered significantly. But it's very difficult and the flip side is that I think that many communities do not recognize the costs that residential development, especially some of that low density residential development, is imposing on communities. So that's where the importance of having local comprehensive plans, having those conversations, really understanding how some of those costs are driving some of the land use decisions, I think it is crucial. But Allison or Brian, if you have other thoughts, please weigh in.
A couple of things. I would encourage the questioner to look at, just as you talked about Wisconsin's work relative to its conversion compared to some of certainly the eastern seaboard states and others that have faced faster development. I would encourage those folks to also look at what those states have done relative to their tax policies for ideas that might be appropriate for Wisconsin. And I wanted to say, converse to what you were saying, Chris, I've been discussing with our research team some analysis of where intensive farmland preservation, such as here in Michigan on the Old Mission Peninsula, has actually resulted in a permanent reduction of the need for municipal services like sewer and water in extensive areas, and thereby is saving the taxpayers a significant amount of money that would not only be for its construction, but also its ongoing maintenance, et cetera. So we're looking to do some more research in that regard.
Right, good point. Allison, do you have anything to add? Otherwise, I think we need to keep moving.
No, let's keep moving.
Okay, to you.
It's great.
Perfect. So time is not on our side in saving our farm and ranchland, which is why AFT just announced a bold goal of doubling the amount of permanently protected farmland by 2040, and reducing the rate of farmland conversion from 2,000 acres a day to 500 acres a day by 2040. We know that to get to this goal, we need to lock arms with the many partners and practitioners on this call and others around the United States who are deeply concerned about saving the land that sustains us. And here you see some of the ways that AFT will be strengthening its commitment to farmland protection and specifically how it will impact Wisconsin. First, establishing the National Ag Land Network. Through this network, AFT is committed to providing the technical assistance, education, policy development, and research activities to help all farmland protection practitioners thrive. We hope to foster beneficial relationships between farmland protection professionals from small land trusts, conservation districts, to state-level programs and all efforts in between. We're also looking to provide new leadership in key locations. We're increasing our staff capacity in the Midwest, particularly Wisconsin, to focus on farmland protection policy and education. AFT developed a new position for the Midwest Farmland Protection Manager, whose role will be to further advance and strengthen farmland protection programming in the Midwest region. Protecting more farmland ourselves and with partners. We're partnering with other land trusts and interested conservation organizations to try to increase the number of protected acres in the state and the conservation practices implemented on those acres, as well as increasing farmland that's facilitated, access to farmland that's then facilitated by that permanent protection. In this effort in particular, if you're interested in learning more, please let us know. We're also working to advocate for stronger state and federal policies. Enacting farmland protection policies at any level requires a bipartisan coalition and active community engagement. In Wisconsin, we're dedicated to building awareness around farmland protection and working with partners to help advance farmland protection in the state. And finally, promoting research-based decision-making. We plan to use the findings from Farms Under Threat to guide our activities on the ground, and we're on the lookout for opportunities to build on this research and learn more about what's happening to farmland at the local and regional level. There are 5 recommendations that we typically provide to states, and Wisconsin already addresses the first one through the publication of DATCAP's Farmland Preservation Program Biennial Report. And hopefully AFT's FUT analysis will be helpful for the department's future efforts. Number 2, strengthen or adopt a coordinated suite of policies. We found for this project that the states with the most effective policy responses are those that have a coordinated suite of policies, not just one. Wisconsin has a great set of tools available currently, including the PACE program and Ag Enterprise areas. Supporting these programs with funding and additional benefits could go a long way in helping to address farmland loss in the state. Supporting farm viability and access to land. Finding ways to facilitate the transfer of land to the next generation of farmers is key. Some states have used beginning farmer tax credits effectively, but focusing on farm linking and state leasing would also help. Planning for agriculture and not just around it. While numerous Wisconsin counties engage in planning for agriculture, looking at agricultural land use from a statewide perspective can help in identifying areas for infill and lessen the threats to farmland from all of that low density residential development that you could see from the map that we looked at earlier. And finally, save the best, but don't forget the rest. All farmland is important and contains numerous benefits worth protecting, but not all land is created equal, and that nationally significant land is particularly resilient and productive. And with so much of that land concentrated in the Midwest, not just the state, but the entire country depends on our efforts to protect it.
Thank you, Allison. So we've got probably time for maybe one more question, Brian, before I turn to this last slide. Maybe 2.
Yeah, well, one question that Allison might be able to address is if there are any PACE contracts being written right now as of 2020, So maybe you want to speak to the status of that and beyond what's being done at the state level, Allison.
Sure. So the PACE program is currently on the books. There's laws that are still in effect for the PACE program, but there's no funding. And so the statewide program, there currently aren't new PACE contracts. There are land trusts working with the ASAP-AL program. Unfortunately, that program doesn't fund a lot of easements in the state. So while there are some contracts that are being signed to protect farmland, there isn't a great amount of them.
All right, thank you. I think that's really gotten at the heart of our questions today. For those of you who may have posed a question that was not answered, please know that our staff that work to develop the report will be compiling a frequently asked questions document, which we'll make people aware of in the near future. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Let me now take a minute to talk about a couple of resources. The first of which is the Farmland Information Center and then the National Agricultural Land Network. And actually, before I talk about them, I want to launch our last poll because through both of these resources, and as Allison mentioned, that we really are trying to increase the amount of technical assistance we can provide to partners around the country. And so for us to do that effectively, we need to know what is the type of technical assistance you would find most helpful. So again, you can select one or more of the following, but this is going to help us in prioritizing the type of technical assistance we focus on first. And I should say that if there is assistance that in other other types of technical assistance that you would find helpful and want to write them in, feel free to do that as well. Okay, so let's see. This is helpful to know. We have had a huge responsive number of people who say they want to know more about land use planning tools. I think that's both from what can a state do to what can be done at the county and municipal level. And these state and local policy tools, again, we're going to start with a webinar series that is going to dig in, like to say, for ag districts, let's take the top 2 states that scored in this policy scorecard and talk about how they got to where they are and what components do they think is most helpful. Those types of sort of deep dives into specific policies are what we're going to do in the early fall, and we hope you all will join. But let's go back then to the Farmland Information Center is a collaboration we've had with USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for decades. It is a web-based clearinghouse of information on all things related to agricultural land protection and more. We are now increasingly focused on access and what are ways for accessing farmland. There are resources around farm transfer and succession as well. But that clearinghouse, which also includes an information answering service, which I really suggest that you can use whenever you want. If you have a question that relates to, again, tell me how much land Wisconsin converted between this date and this date, they can tell you that. you want to know statistics about the census, if you want to know about state policies in other states related to ag districts, the Farmland Information has all of that information and is happy to help you because that's what they're paid to do. Turning to the National Agricultural Land Network, again, as we've said, what we're trying to do with this is to build the collective capacity of those folks, many of you who are on this call today, on peer networking and information sharing and additional technical information. And that's going to run the gamut from those who are getting into farmland and ranchland protection for the first time to say, you know, what makes for a good agricultural conservation easement, up to many more more advanced conversations that is what we like to call protection plus. So how do you think about protecting land and increasing that access to next generation farmers and ranchers? How do you think about working with landowners on protected properties to encourage additional conservation? How would you incentivize that? In thinking about solar siting, again, a very important topic, and one that lots of people are thinking about, is how do you do it in a way that recognizes that landowners want to derive some kind of economic benefit from being able to put up solar arrays, but how do you do it in a way that is focused on doing that on more marginal land? All of these kinds of conversations are things that we hope to do. Brian and Allison are both going to be involved in this work in the network around the Midwest, and I think that many of you will hear more from them over the summer, and we hope to hear from you all as well. You're welcome to give me a call or send an email if you have any particular questions. If you haven't signed up for the network and want to do so, you can go to farmland.org/NALN. It is free. The membership really is intended for those folks who are engaged in either planning or ag protection specifically, but we are taking collaborators as well. So that's organizations that may care about the issue but are not working on it on every day of the week. So I think with that, I'll close there and turn it back to Allison for any last thoughts and to close us out.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today and for all of your thoughtful questions. We'll be following up with all of you who registered with links to both the report and to this recording. And if you have any other questions or thoughts, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. Thank you.